As of now, we have recorded, we're completely started. Right, you are looking at burial chamber, and I did promise you all a story that's been written by our author, by a certain Mary Trevelyan. I promised you a story by her tonight, and that's exactly where we're going to go. But I think it's only fair that we did a bit of archaeology and history first. I think that would be a good start. But you're dead right, Del. This is Tinkinswood burial chamber, St. Nicholas burial chamber. This is looking at the front of the burial chamber. And this is a site that I visited so many times. I've actually camped out here. I've taken many groups here. I've been to this site by myself. I've been to this site with Michelle. I've been to this site with my parents. I've been to the site with my grandparents and my children. This is a big part of my life. And to be honest with you, I always feel something different when I go to this site. However, it's not a site that I should be visiting at night time. And if it's a story that Amy has heard me tell her, we will go into a little bit of detail about that in about 10-20 minutes. But before we actually go into the story properly, we're going to quickly move away from Tinkinswood burial chamber, and we're going to actually look at another burial chamber. And for those that don't know of the locations that we're visiting tonight, we do actually have maps, so don't wonder or worry about where we're going. So this is a nice little easy one for me tonight, because it's sort of very much tape recorded in my head. Those, if anyone knows the Vale of Glamorgan, will be very much aware of this area here, known as Culverhouse Cross. Culverhouse Cross is the road that you would take from Lantwick Major along the A48, and you'll pass through places like Cowbridge, Bonvilston, St. Nicholas is where we're looking at tonight. St. Nicholas, Tinkinswood burial chambers, st.Lythans, and eventually you would get to Culverhouse Cross, marked on the map as the Copthorne Hotel. So just to sort of fit your minds, so you know where we're going if we miss out on anything tonight. So Del will know of my excitement with being able to draw on the screen. So this is where. So we're really going to be looking at St. Lythans today, and we're going to be looking at the site of St. Lythans burial chamber, which is near this clump of trees here. Now, there's a rather interesting clump of trees. So if I don't talk about this clump of trees tonight, we will do it again. And then we will go past Duffring here, and we will go then up the road, and we will visit this place, which is Tinkinswood burial chamber. But interestingly enough, for all of you, we won't really do a lot about St. Nicholas tonight, because we're going to be looking at St. Nicholas 2 again. But we will mention this. We will mention this. This is the route known as the Julius Maritima. This is the route of the old Roman road, which comes into the story a little bit tonight. So it will be a part of what we're doing. So clearing all that, getting back to the mouse. And what we then need to do is look at this. This, Del, is known as, can you tell me which burial chamber this one is?
Is that the St. Lythans one?
St. Lythans burial chamber. And this is known as the Greyhound's Bitch's Lair. And I'm going to tell you a nice little story about this one. But before we tell you that nice little story, in front of you, you can actually see some of the archaeological excavations. They were doing archaeological excavations at this site just under a decade ago. And when they were doing archaeological excavations at this burial chamber just over a decade ago, they were excavating on this area. and also in front of the burial chamber. And what they found out in front of the burial chamber here, they actually found some human bones, which comes into a little bit of a folk story, which I'm going to tell you. And at the back here, this is actually the barrow that actually led to this burial chamber. It wasn't a very long barrow at all. It was a barrow that was about 15 meters in length, but it was a barrow completely made up of stone. Now, that helps me as an archaeologist and also as a storyteller as well, in explaining about this landscape here. This landscape is known as the landscape of cursed ground. It's a landscape where crops will not grow. And the reason why crops will not grow is logical, because over the years, the rocky ground has spread out into the field and made it difficult to plough because there's lots of little stones across the field. So hence why it's called cursed ground. So in fact, the terminology cursed ground for this landscape at St. Lythans actually has some archaeological evidence backing it up. I love it when that happens. Now, let's go on to another little bit of an image. I don't want to rush these images tonight, and I don't want to rush this lecture either. But inside this wonderful chamber, there's a little story associated with it. And this is the other side of the chamber. So if you're thinking this, where we've been looking is in a westerly direction where the mound is, and now we're looking in an easterly direction. So looking into it from an easterly direction, looking west. Sorry to confuse everybody. And rather interestingly enough, when this was referred to as the Greyhound's Bitch's Lair, it was at the time that it was actually being used as a little building to keep the greyhounds in, associated with St. Lythans Farm, which is very nearby. And it's said before it was being used as a kennel for the local greyhounds, it's a local antiquarian drew an illustration of when he looked in there, there was a body of an individual with his back resting up against that back stone there, with his skull still on his ribs, which is a very strange illustration altogether, because that would have simply not happened, because we know that in the Neolithic period, when this burial chamber was actually erected over 5,000 years ago, they would have only put the skulls and the long bones in there. But then again, that's an Archaeology Cymru lecture for another day by myself. But you never know, somebody could have been murdered in this chamber sometime at the beginning of the 1800s, and what the antiquarian was actually seeing was a true set of human remains of somebody that wasn't from the Neolithic period, but somebody who was only just from a few decades ago when the antiquarian visited this wonderful burial chamber. And do you know what? Before we actually go on to this wonderful story from Mary Trevelyan's book about Roger Merrick, a folk story of Castell Carrig, which is actually Tinkinswood burial chamber, which is the other site that we will shortly go to. There's a little story associated with this one. This is also known as the field of the Windmill. And the reason why it's also referred to as the field of the Windmill, on the eve of summer solstice, the 21st of June every single year, the eve of summer solstice, so that would be the 20th of June, it's said that at dusk time, if you crept up on this burial chamber, what you will see is the big capstone on top of it, which weighs about 15 to 20 tons in weight, would lift off, would spin very slowly 3 times, and the 3 stones underneath, the oceliths underneath, would go for a little walk to the nearby stream for a drink. And by the time they had drunk and got back, the capstone would be ready to rest on top of those 3 standing stones, and then they would rest for another year. So this is known as the field of the Windmill. Now, I did actually mention earlier on, I mentioned that there was a round sort of circular enclosure nearby. Don't have any images of that because I actually wanted to cover that again, but we've actually surveyed and studied that site in quite a lot of detail on a project that we did for Archaeology Cymru many years ago. But back to this again, a little bit more of the archaeology. When they were actually excavating here, they obviously realized that there was loads of stones piled up. But one thing as an archaeologist that I'm quite clear of is two things. Is that soil never ever covered the top of this burial chamber. That's one point. And the other point is this hole here. Now this is a rather interesting hole. And why is it a rather interesting hole? I will tell you. Now, if you go from the other side again, hang on a minute. Okay, you can see a little hole there. But unfortunately, due to the angle, you can't really see the hole with this illustration. I'm just going to give it a go to see if I can sort of zoom in clarity on the image. You can start to see a little hole there, but if you look at it at the right angle, you can see through. Now, it used to be believed by some archaeologists that were unaware of the mound being behind it, that you'd be able to look through that hole and you'd be able to line it up with a nearby stream and another monument in the distance. Well, actually, that's not actually the real purpose of this hole. It's likely that this hole led directly, and people used to look into the stone and the soil behind. Now that's rather interesting, because there's a thought about Neolithic people going into a chamber like this with the bones of their ancestors around them and talking into this hole, the secrets, and they would maybe get angry and they would shout into that hole, and they'd give all their anger into that hole, and that would be basically part of the civilization that once existed in the Neolithic period. It's a wonderful site to visit. They used to have a fence around it. It is a scheduled ancient monument, but it's well worth a visit. And again, those trees in the distance. If anyone of you ever gets to visit this site, you get out the car, there's a little sign there. Probably best not to read it, because there's a lot of stuff that I don't agree with on it, but you may agree with it. And then you look at these stones, and then sort of over here, there's a circular enclosure with a ditch around it, which is with a raised earthen bank inside with a load of trees. Rather interesting site. And we'll mention a similar site further in this lecture today. So, Del, you've been very silent. Is there anything you'd like to ask about St.Lythans before we actually carry on?
No, I don't know a lot about it. Don't usually go that way that often, unless it's sort of between Porthcawl and Cardiff. It's not connected to Anne, is it? Not our Anne, Saint Anne.
Oh no! It's related to no saints. There's no saints related to this one. So what I'm going to do, I'm actually going to. I know some of you can see it. It's a wonderful book. If you can see it up, can you see that, Del?
No.
No. Okay. If you're not able to see my image, then
if you
don't
put it in front of your face, it might come up because of the background. That's better.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Good. Well, it's a lovely book. It's a lovely, nice smelling book, because this book dates from. Let me have a look at the dating. Yeah. I think this one dates from about 1910 or 1920. So it's over it's over 100 years old, 200 years old. It's over 100 years old. And the title of the book is From Snowdon to the Sea, Stirring Stories of North and South Wales, by our wonderful Mary Trevelyan. So here we go. I'm going to get really into this, and I will have a little break partway through. Roger Merrick's Ride, a folk story of Castell Carreg. So we leave St.Lythans, and then we will go over to Castell Carreg. Long stretches of purple heather fringed the brown moorland pools, around which yellow marsh marigolds bloom in profusion in the spring, and tall golden irises hold their heads aloft in the early summer. It was a glorious evening. The mellow radiance of the autumnal sunset glowed in the western sky, lighting up for a brief time the darkest corners and gilding the tarnished livery of the woodlands. In the south, we're looking south, folks, the Severn Sea was almost lost in the golden haze, through which the steep home loomed like a fairy fortress or a lonely dream island, where one could forget the bitter past and conjure up a mystical future that should atone for the uncertain present. Can I interject there? That's quite appropriate, don't you think, Del? Here and there on the sea, the ships looked like phantoms gliding to or from unknown havens, and the little skiff sailed lazily along like a fairy flotilla bound for the islands of the Hesperides. To the west, embowered in woodlands, is the Vale of Worship, dotted here and there by hoary and moss-grown druidic stones, beyond which stands the largest cromlech in all Britain. Looking from the high moorland, the surrounding country appeared like a fairy realm, stretching towards the region of the setting sun. On the outskirts of the moorland, a few straggling cottages remained in the days of which I write, and in one of these lived an old woman known by the name of Mary the Downs. Now, when we actually saw the map earlier on, between, if you didn't notice, just this side of Culverhouse Cross, there was a place marked on the map called the Downs. And there, going back to Mary Trevelyan, waste, common land, moorland, and unenclosed heaths are frequently called the Downs in Wales. Mary lived on St.Lythans Down near St. Nicholas in the Vale of Glamorgan. She retained a bright intellect and could thread her needle without the aid of glasses at the age of 93. And even then remembered all the old folk stories that were told in her childhood. In her quaint Anglo-Cymric poems, she would tell the tales of her grandmother and all the traditions, and nursery stories handed orally down from one generation to another. She remembered ministers and men coming long distances to lay ghosts, and she was perfectly certain her great-grandmother was a friend of the little people, as the fairies are sometimes called in Wales, the Tylwyth and the Bendith and Mamai had visited Cogan Pill in her own childhood, and she had been fairy-led. Anyone that knows what that means gives a different meaning. Fairy-led in a field near Wenvo Castle when quite a grown woman. She had also found strange small silver in her own new tin money box before anybody had placed a contribution therein. Mary, the 93-year-old, would not have it that her mother had possibly put some small silver in the box for luck's sake. Seated in her armchair, very much as I am today, besides the glowing fire, Mary would tell her stories as long as anybody cared to listen, like you guys tonight. And many pleasant hours could be whiled away in the old woman's company. Her language was not polished, and sometimes it became confused. But she was one of the last of the old Welsh storytellers, the last of a generation that has seen its day and is lost in the peaceful past. And for a moment, what we need to do, we need to actually change where we are with the images. Fleetingly going past, moving away from St.Lythans, and all the way over to Tinkinswood. But before we actually do any more, I need to sort of cite a little bit more in the story. So we're actually on the map. We're actually here. This is St. Lythans. You go further on down, if you can follow the cursor, Let's get my little arrows in. So there's the burial chamber. And then the story then takes you to here, which is our Tinkinswood St. Nicholas burial chamber. And there's St. Nicholas. And then eventually, towards the end of the story, we go down here and we go all the way along the A48, all the way to somewhere else. So that gives you a nice little map of where we are. But I think what we need to do is we need to actually go on a little bit further. And we need to get my mouse back on. And there we are at Tinkinswood burial chamber. There she lies. So again, to give you another idea, so Tinkinswood burial chamber, this farm comes into the story. It's really important you know where all these are. So the Tinkinswood burial chamber, that's the farm associated with this story. And the next bit of the story is the gentleman that's mentioned in here walks all the way down this road from St. Nicholas, starting point, St. Nicholas, goes to here, ends up going all the way down here, and that's the rest of the story. So what we need to do, I've set the scene, and now setting the scene, we need a good old image of the burial chamber. And there it is. So here we go. I'm not going to try and throw my voice, and we'll just read as it is. And here we go. Did you ever hear the story of Castell Carreg? Asked Mary. I told her I had heard much about the celebrated cromlech and others of its kind in the neighbourhood. Now those words are Mary Trevilian's. Going back to Mary. Oh, 'tis nothing about the druids and bards. 'Tis a story my great-grandfather used to tell my grandfather. Mary related the story in her own old fashion. And Mary Trevilian has woven it together as thus. Although nearly 5 years had passed since the terrible battle of St. Fagans was fought, the conflict was still cruelly fresh in the people's memory, and many lamented the loss of relatives and friends, as if they had only just been severed from them. Now, those that know and were at my lecture the other week will know that the Battle of St. Fagans was in 1648. So that's a date for you. So this is 5 years on. In the lowest end of the Druidic Vale of Worship, a small farmhouse called Northcliffe nestles under the trees in a veritable sleepy hollow. Interjection, folks, is a little bit south of Dyffryn House, a little bit south of st.Lythans. Away beyond, broad meadowlands stretch from the mill of Dyffryn.
Your sound is breaking up, Carl.
Okay, it's got back again?
Yes.
Away beyond it, broad meadowlands stretch from the mill of Dyffryn to that of Lydmore, both in full working order in the days of Cromwell. On the heights above Northcliffe stood Sutton, then a quaint old Tudor-built house. Now it is an ordinary farm. By the way, folks, it's still standing today, just a little bit south of st.Lythans. Even in the present days of toil and traffic, Northcliffe is secluded. Still, in the stream that flows through the mill meadows, otters are to be seen. And still in the orchards, the nightingales sing, as though the world was in its youth. Roger Merrick of Northcliffe was a rich man before Cromwell scoured the country. But afterwards, he found it difficult to make ends meet. So obviously, Roger Merrick had been a royalist, no friend of Cromwell. He had lost 2 sons in the Battle of St. Fagans, and one of them had left a widow and children, the care of whom fell to Roger Merrick's own family. Another son named Cyril was taken prisoner and still remained in exile. So top this up, 1 son lost in battle, 1 son in exile, and his name was Cyril. So let's take a note of that one. It's always good to have a pen when you read these stories. Late in the autumn of of 1649, Roger Merrick took the path through the fields in the Vale of Worship and passed Castell Carrig on his way to the village of St. Nicholas on his left. He had many calls to make, and twilight was deepening into night when he started to walk home again, this time by way of the road. Autumn leaves fluttered silently downwards into one of the most beautiful roadways in South Wales. Broad margins of grass are on each side of the thoroughfare, and under stately and ancient oaks and elms, a sparkling brook glides onward to the valley below. Hoary oaks that have stood the storms of centuries crown each upland, and groves of the same venerable trees still remain where once the Druids worshipped. As Roger Merrick went past the manor house St. Nicholas, where chestnut trees form a dense canopy even in the daylight and make the roadway as dark as night, early in the evening a man accosted him. So he's already gone over the A48, the old Roman road. And here we go. "It is dark hereabouts," said the man to Roger. "That it is," replied Roger. "But who may you be?" The man replied, "You know my voice, don't you?" Roger exclaimed, "I can't say that I do." The man replied, "Don't you remember Miles Button of Sheepcote?" Roger replied, "I do. He was taken prisoner at the Battle of St. Fagans." And the man said, "Yes, and he had a son named Morgan." Roger exclaimed, "I remember. Poor fellow, he was killed in the great Battle of St. Fagans." The stranger replied, "Was he?" Roger sorrowfully said, "To be sure he was." And the man replied, "No, no." Then, well, if he wasn't killed, why didn't he come home when it was safe for him to come home? 'Tis going on 5 years since that terrible battle. Roger sighed deeply and tears filled his eyes. "Morgan Button exclaimed," said the stranger hurriedly. "He went abroad and returned." Roger replied, "When did he come back?" The man said, "The last week in October." Roger then replied, "I've not heard a word about it." Roger was always one of the earliest to know the gossip of the countryside, and resented the idea of anybody else being first in the field. "You may not have heard the news," said the stranger, "but he's come for all that." Just then the men emerged out of the dense shadows into the twilight, and immediately Roger Merrick recognized his companion. "Well, indeed," exclaimed Roger. "Sure enough, 'tis Morgan Button himself. But what do you come this way for? Why don't you go to Sheepcote?" The stranger, now known as Morgan, "To tell the truth, I want to keep out of the way for a bit. My father is home, and I've been a bad boy, spent too much money, and he's angered about it. My mother asked me to keep away from the house for a few weeks." And Roger then said, "And where may you be staying?" "With the people of Tinkinswood farm." Roger then exclaimed, "With the Powells?" Gentleman then said, the same as the Powells." The men walked slowly on the growing darkness until they reached the little bridge, spanning the brook and leading to the farmhouse known as Tinkinswood, close beside Castell Carrig, Tinkinswood burial chamber. Morgan Button talked much of his escape after the Battle of St. Fagans, and of his doings whilst abroad, and time seemed to fly. So pleasant was the conversation, the men lingered on the bridge until nightfall, and then Roger was loath to leave the wanderer. And then Morgan said, "Come up with me to the house for a little bit. It's early yet." And then Roger then replied, "Well, to be sure, I think I will. It can't be long after 6 by the light." At Tinkinswood, Roger was warmly welcomed. The inmates were hospitable people, and soon Powell the elder, Morgan Button, and Roger Merrick were regaling themselves with...
Sounds not very good, Carl.
Isn't it?
No.
What about it now?
That's okay now.
Okay. Morgan Button and Roger Merrick were eating cakes and drinking beer. In the midst of their rejoicing, loud knocking was heard at the front door. A stranger begged permission to rest a while, for the night was dark, and he had come a long distance. Come in," said John Powell, throwing the front door widely open. In strode a tall young man dressed in the fashion of the period. "I have tethered my horse in a tree in yonder yard," said the strange voice. John Powell directed his men to see to the animal and led the way to the kitchen. Roger Merrick could scarcely believe his eyes, for there, erect as ever, stood his very own son, Cyril. Cyril, he had finally seen his son Cyril after 5 years. He thought his son Cyril he was a prisoner, but you know he's finally seeing his son. Roger then said, my son returned from exile."
Carl?
Yes, Amy?
You can hear me? Yeah, sorry, your internet's a bit glitchy.
Right, so is my voice not sounding good at all?
It's jumpy.
Yeah, it's breaking up now and then.
Right, okay. Right, that's not good. Okay, we'll take what I'm going to do. I'm going to try and get if it's that bad, I'm going to try and get the land lead in. If you can bear with me a second, hang on. Okay, the auxiliary thing will come on in a minute. Is that sounding okay?
Yes.
Okay, should go over to the land lead now. Okay. So where were we? Roger Merrick could scarcely believe his own eyes. For there, erect as ever, stood his youngest son, Cyril. My son returned from exile," Roger exclaimed. This was his son. He had come back after 5 years. Cyril warmly returned his father's embraces and his friends' hearty greetings. Then they all sat down and talked and quaffed large tankards filled with foaming nut-brown ale. Story after story was told, and the night was growing. Morgan Button quaffed the foaming ale and related his experiences abroad. Cyril Merrick also heartily quaffed the ale and talked much about his adventures, while John Powell, the owner of the farm at Tinkinswood, and Roger Merrick listened long and earnestly. The hours flew like fleet-winged birds before a hurricane. It was 6 o'clock, and now it's 11 o'clock, folks. 11 o'clock at night. And Roger said he must go, but Morgan Button and Cyril Merrick urged him to remain. If you'll stay another hour, said Cyril Merrick, you shall have my horse. I'll stay here, and you can go home and prepare mother for my coming. What a kind and thoughtful son. Roger, mounted on a swift horse, would be home in no time. It mattered little if he remained another hour. Again and again were the tankards replenished with the foaming nut-brown ale of Wales. It was midnight, 12 o'clock. Still one more story, then Roger must go. It was an hour later when he mounted Cyril's horse, his son's horse, and had the reins put in his hands by his long-exiled son. The knowledge was too good to be true. His son had returned. He's on the back of his own son's horse. Amazing. After 5 years, he had embraced his son. He had drunk with his son, and this is his son's horse. How the kind wife at home would rejoice. His own wife would be amazed that one of two of their sons had come home. Roger then said to his son, for this my son that was lost is found again. Cyril, my boy, what is the horse's name? Asked his father, Roger. Firefly, replied Cyril. He's fleet-footed, but quite safe. Then Cyril lighted the small saddle lantern, which he always used when riding in the dark. Good night, said Roger to his son. Good night, responded the other men. Down through the darkness and the narrow lane leading to the road went Roger. He was careful just there, for the lane was rough and the horse was strange to those parts. So what we're doing now, we're going down this road here. If you can follow on the map, we're going all the way down here, leaving the farm. Presently, he reached the road leading from St. Nicholas towards Dyffryn. So this is what I just pointed out. He was careful. At first, the horse went almost too slowly, but once on the good road, it went at better speed. By and by, it quickened and its pace. And when Roger turned into the road leading from st.Lythans, Firefly was going positively fast. It's a great word, positively fast. So we'll just show you where they're going. So what they're going now, if you follow the cursor, they've gone down this road and they're going all the way down past Dyffryn. So it's a good horse, Roger's thinking. Soon afterwards, he thought the horse went just a little too fast. Firefly struck its hoof sharply upon the rocky road. That was enough. Firefly started at a race horse speed, and the hands of the rider could not check him. On and on went the horse and the rider, as though to win a wager. Roger Merrick used every effort to restrain his son's horse, but it failed. Although the night was dark and the road strange to the horse, the animal raced until Roger Merrick felt as though he were being carried off in a whirlwind. So now they're down here where the cursor is. Northcliffe was passed and Sutton was reached. Still on through the darkness and the night went Firefly. Up hill and down dale, clattering through villages, silent as the grave, bounding over brooks, dashing past lonely church yards where the dead slept oblivious of everything, and surmounting every obstacle. Firefly raced as if lives were at stake. Roger's brain whirled. He was almost too giddy to wonder how and where the race would end. What a terrible ride. He could never forget it, never. He longed for the first light of dawn to reveal where they were. At last it came. A rift appeared in the grey November clouds, and Roger had sufficient light to see that they were on the Golden Mile, near Bridgend, and many miles away from home. Firefly slackened its pace for a moment, during which time Roger Merrick was able to turn the horse's head, but the next minute the animal was careering as madly as ever. "The animal is surely bewitched! Bewitched! It's bewitched!" Roger shouted and screamed as he heard the people in the village shouting, "A runaway! A runaway! Roger, it's a runaway!" The race was fearful. The noise of the people along the thoroughfare became deafening. Clatter, clatter went the horses' hooves upon the road. Rattle and whiz went the whirlwind around Roger's ears as the bewitched horse raced along. Suddenly the cock crew and the horse stopped. Roger Merrick rubbed his eyes. He found himself directly on top of this stone. He was now on top of the stone. He found himself at Castell Carreg. He found himself back at Tinkinswood burial chamber. He found himself lying on top of this very stone. He then screamed, "This bewitched horse!" He felt as if he had fallen on the cromlech, as if seated on the back of the horse. Was the ride merely a dream? Was this due to the copious draughts of drink? Roger Merrick went home a sorrowful but wiser man. And when he told his wife the story of the firefly race, she said, "That will teach thee a lesson, to come home straight instead of going to sleep at Castell Carreg." A year later, the exiled son returned home. But Morgan Button's fate remained a mystery. Early in the last century, it was a folk remark in that neighborhood when a man went to market to warn him to take care that he does not ride round Castell Carreg on the way home. And the very interesting thing about that story is that Morgan Button had come home as a ghost to tell Roger that his son was to return. And there are other stories like that. But be very wary not to drink too much on the way home, because you might not only see a ghost, or you might ride on the back of the phantom horse Firefly. Another word for the Keffel Door. How did that sound for you, Del?
That's good. Yeah.
So what we're going to do, we're at Tinkinswood burial chamber now, and we've been at Tinkins burial chamber for a little while. And what we are going to do now is we're going to tell you a little bit of the archaeology of Tinkinswood. Now, interesting enough, on that plaque there, it's a plaque that it is associated with Dr. Ward's excavations that ended in 1914. And after they had excavated the burial chamber, the 50-ton slab on top actually cracked. So they decided to prop it up with a little pillar. All the stones that were supporting this side of the burial chamber were removed to get access into the burial chamber by the archaeologists. And when you actually go to the burial chamber, there's lots of things that are not really clear when you actually go there. Rather interestingly enough, when you go inside, the outside of the stone is very rough, but some of the stones inside are very smooth. Even though there are some striations on the inside of these stones here, the striations themselves are natural striations, but the stone inside is very smooth. And it's said that they went through great efforts to smooth the inside of these stones. Now, whenever I've actually given lectures about Neolithic burial chambers, and Neolithic stones like this, I always refer to them as chambers. And it comes from something that I believe since I was about 14 years old. When I first visited this burial chamber, the first thing I actually thought was this, after sort of I think it was my my grandparents parked their car here. When I'd actually walked all the way over to the burial chamber, I actually thought, actually, this would be a nice place to live, because obviously I knew about the people at this age lived in round houses, and you know, living in round houses could be very damp, and so on and so on. I thought they built the burial chambers in a far better way than they lived. So lots of archaeologists have actually started to think that the final use of these structures was actually as a burial chamber, but the initial use was for something completely different. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a little bit of a view from above and actually look at this absolutely massive stone. If we look at the stone, this burial chamber from above, one thing that we do know is that when the archaeologist Ward was actually reconstructing the chamber itself after the excavations, all these stones here that are chevron-like, here, this is where they reconstructed, and that the archaeology, that's the original archaeology, this and this and this is actually original stonework. And one thing that we do know is that this, like many sites, started off more basic, right? So at the back, when the archaeologists excavated, there was a pit with bones from another period. We're not really sure what period they actually come from. And this site was also excavated about a decade ago as well, but the original excavations were in 1914. So moving on again. So it's rather interesting that when you actually come out of your car, you park your car, and if I can go to a plan a minute, hang on. So if you park your car here, in this bit, as you follow the footpath down here, you cannot see the burial chamber. But if you go directly this way, you can see the burial chamber directly in front of you. But the interesting thing, no matter how much you look up, you cannot see the burial chamber. When you get to here, you cannot see the burial chamber. When you get to here, you cannot see the burial chamber. When you get to here, you see the burial chamber. And this is a rather interesting illusion of the ancestors. And the illusion is as follows. The illusion is, if any of you have actually been to West Kennet Long Barrow, if you ever get out to the car at West Kennet Long Barrow, you can see the Long Barrow in the distance. But when you actually go down into the valley by West Kennet Long Barrow, you cannot see the Long Barrow. You cannot see the Long Barrow until you actually get so close to it that when you go over the brow of the hill, you can suddenly see the Long Barrow. And this is the same thing. This is the same thing that we actually see with Tinkinswood burial chamber, the illusion or the mystery of the burial chamber itself. You know, these burial chambers are absolutely amazing because they've got a sense of illusion about them, a sense of mystery about them. So what I would like to do, and do you know what, I don't think we're going to get as far as I actually wanted to tonight. So what we're going to do is I'm going to actually tell you a little bit of a story that'll put some hairs go up on the back of your neck. It's a story that that actually occurred to me. So when we actually visited this burial chamber, we had a ghostly walk. And I told everybody all about it. I basically said, well, you know, if you whisper into this burial chamber on Midsummer's Eve, on Midwinter's Eve, you can have 3 wishes. If you actually sleep underneath this burial chamber, 3 things can happen to you. And I actually did this in 1995. I actually slept underneath this burial chamber. And the story has it that you either go into the past, you die, or you go insane. And I'm not gonna say which one happened to me, but I didn't die. So there's two options. So I actually took everybody there that day, and it was an evening walk at Tinkinswood Burial Chamber. It was about 3 years ago. We went up to the back here. I showed them all this. We had a really good evening. And you know, and I actually told lots of people some really deep secrets about my faith and what I believed. And we also visited this as well, which is this here, is actually the quarry where they actually excavated the big capstone out of, and the quarry is actually to be found over by here. What I did, I took everybody and we actually visited. Let's go back to the quarry. We actually visited this quarry, and then one rather interesting thing. It was about 9 o'clock at night. Just as you entered the quarry, and it was about November time. It was about November time. Just as you entered the quarry, about here, it was warm. So you would pass through this bit. It was warm, and I said, everyone pass through this bit. It was warm. So we passed out of it. It was warm. And I thought, this is a bit strange. So I said, right, folks, this is something quite strange about this. So we did it again, and we stood at that spot, and it was warm. It was November, and it was warm. Very strange. Anyway, so long story short, after the walk had finished, and everyone went home, I decided to go back and have a look at the burial chamber, which was a really big mistake. And if anyone believes this type of stuff, believe me, there's something that you need to do. When you expose yourself to ghosts and things that go bump in the night, you've got to close your sacred spaces. So when everyone had left me in the car park, I had my car with me. I phoned Michelle and I said, "Oh, I'll be coming back soon." And she said, "Oh, okay. Are you going to go and have a look at the site, because I don't want you to?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm just going to have a look over by the burial chamber." And she said, "Please don't go and have another look at the burial chamber without anybody with you." It was now about 10:30 at night, and I did. Anyway, so I did that. I walked all the way from here, all the way across the field, all the way across the field. And I remember it to this day. And by the way, this takes about 10 minutes to walk. I didn't get back to my car for another hour. And the strangest thing was that when I got around the corner, just below this red button, this red dot, just as I got around the corner, I looked at the top of the burial chamber, and I actually saw a ghost hovering. And it was really strange. I actually saw a male ghost hovering on top of this burial chamber, and it was white. And I started talking to this ghost, and I'm not making this up. I started talking to this ghost, and it was a really strange out-of-body experience. It was really, really frightening. And I actually approached the ghost, and it was still there. It did not move. And at which point I panicked, and I got really scared, and because it was not going. And I knew full well that there was something not quite right about this ghost. And I got to be honest with you, by the time I got to my car, I was in a right mess. At which point, Michelle had started phoning people who had actually been on the walk to find out where the hell I was. And one or two of them were going to come back to try to get my head together. And I got to be honest with you, it's one evening that I was in a real mess. I remember it to this day. It was really, really scary. How does that sound, Del?
Yeah, you mentioned that before on something else that I've been on with you, but yeah, it's I think we'd all be frightened.
It wouldn't move. It wouldn't go.
Yeah.
It just wouldn't go. And the weirdest thing was, about a year earlier, a friend of Michelle's ashes, we actually spread the friend's ashes from on top of the burial chamber onto the grass below. And we spread these ashes. And the weird thing was, you could actually still see some of the ashes on the stone about a year later, and which was quite strange. And I can remember this to this day, and it was really, really scary. And if anyone's actually sussed me out, they will actually know that there is something that I do which I don't make clear. But there's this one day somebody asked me for a spell that they wanted to actually rid them of negative energy. So I got them to pick an apple from a tree from their garden, which nobody else was to touch. And they got a little note together with a little bit of writing on. And I said, they've got to dig a hole with me there. And they put the note in the hole with the apple, and they had problems with their mind at the time. And I cast a spell, and lo and behold, the problems with their mind went. And I said, you must never ever go back and dig up that apple and the note, because if you do, your problems will actually come back to you. And I won't tell you any more about that. So what I'd like to do, when you actually go to Tinkinswood Burial Chamber today, it's very strange. And the reason why it's very strange is because there are loads of trees all the way around here. It's full of trees. Even all the way, there's some trees on the back as well. And it looks very strange. It looks nothing like that. But there's one thing that I've really learnt about these sites. You've really got to respect them, because they've got really deep energy. And I know it sounds a bit strange. And whenever I do this talk involving this site, it does strange things to my mind, which it's doing now. So whenever you actually go to the site like this, take a little ribbon and tie it in the tree. It's almost as if you're keeping the sense of votivity intact with this site. So again, that sort of really weird, mysterious image. And I would not advise actually going inside the chamber out of respect for the remains of up to 50 people that they actually found in this burial chamber in 1914 that have not been reinterred at this site, which they should actually be reinterred at this site. So this is what the site actually looks like today, with all the trees. And rather interestingly enough, a bit of a sad story. It was believed once that there was an avenue of stones all the way along this field, all the way along. And there was an avenue of stones, I'm told, up until about 50, 60 years ago. And the local farmer rooted them all out and smashed them all up, which to me is absolute sacrilege. And if you ever go there, do a bit of a homage to the pile of stones that's over here. And if you do go to Tinkinswood Burial Chamber, if you look through a gap in the hedge, there's another burial chamber over here that you can actually see in the field. And there's other bits of another burial chamber in this one. In fact, at one stage, it's believed that the entire field was full of so many burial chambers and stone circles. But unfortunately, the only one actually left today is this one. So what I'd like to do, I know I'm running over, so what we're going to do about another 5-6 minutes. Is that okay with you, Amy and Del?
Yeah, fine.
Is Amy still with us?
Yeah, I am.
You can hardly hear you, Amy. That's why I've not brought you on. Has my voice been okay ever since?
Yes.
Yes.
I tell you what, I think there was something else going on with that. But I probably need to shake my mind of this Tinkinswood bug that I always get. So what I'd like to do is actually tell you a couple of secrets, my own little secrets. Now, the little secrets I'd like to tell you is that let's get to grips with where we are. Tinkinswood Burial Chamber is over. It's slightly off the map, so it's sort of over here. But where we're actually going to go now, quickly, is if any of you actually know the A48,
Yep.
you will be aware that over here there's a standing stone. And that standing stone used to stand here, but that Neolithic standing stone was moved. And what I'm going to actually tell you is about another mysterious burial chamber. And you know what? I would actually like to come and visit this topic again in another evening. And that's what I'm going to do, because there's so much I haven't done. So over here, there's actually another burial chamber. And over here, there's a circle in the woods, which you can't actually see on the plan. However, what we're going to do is quickly go over to here. And if you can actually see my wonderful dell, there is actually another burial chamber.
Yeah.
But it's a collapsed burial chamber. Do you know the one I mean?
No.
Right, okay. But there's a weird sort of circle in these woods over here. And it's a very strange circle indeed, because it's when I say a very strange circle, you don't get it, but if the valley drops away quite steeply, you can't see the contours. The valley starts to drop away and forms a bit of a ridge. So actually, there's a little bit of a ridge that sort of goes across here, sort of in alignment with this chamber. And this is known as a collapsed burial chamber, and it's a rather interesting chamber indeed, and you can actually see it a little bit better. So I'm gonna tell you a couple of other bits and pieces, and then we'll call it a night. So if you can ever get permission from the local farmer, and the local farmer is over here. And there is actually a public footpath that actually starts, if I can remember, sort of over here. And it sort of follows over to here. And it comes out into the field. And you can actually go here. You can actually see this, but you're not supposed to, because it's slightly off the public footpath. But if you can get permission, it's great. But there's a very strange thing, which I haven't really told many people. And the strange thing is that here there's a nice little valley. Strange enough, it's a hidden valley, and it's a strange little hidden valley. And if you ever get an opportunity, if you can get permission off the farmer, in the hedge here, there's a really old stone, which is like a glacial stone. It's a very, very strange stone indeed. And there's another I believe, another little burial chamber in this field. So a little bit more about the landscape. We won't do any more about that now. But what I need to do is I need to mention the Romans. And that's where we're going to go just very, very briefly. And we're going to go very briefly. And I'm going to point a couple of things out to you. So let me get my little arrows in again. And that should be very useful. The Roman road, the Julius Maritima. This here, you can see the grass verge. There's a grass verge all the way along the A48, all the way along it, which is quite strange, because it's one of the only roads that I know of with a massive grass verge along the edge of it. And you can't really work out why there's this massive grass verge. And the reason why there's a massive grass verge is that's where the original Roman road may have actually been. Because what happens is that over time, the road surface falls out of use, and then they move it again, and they move it again. So by the time you get to the modern A48, built on exactly the original alignment of the Roman road, the Julius Maritima, they actually raise the level of the modern road to actually go a little bit above where the original Roman road is, along this length. But the original Roman road itself may have actually been a little bit more straighter, something more like this, a little bit more straighter than the actual modern road itself, because the modern road is actually following a ridge. So what we're going to do, we're going to actually go to an image of um, the burial chamber. That's quite an eerie image, so that's a good one to have a discussion over. So Del and Amy, if you would like to say something, best to say it now, and then we'll open the mics out for a little few moments. Anything you two would like to say?
Yeah, can
Well,
you see me properly now?
Right, yeah, Del, you go first, and then Amy.
okay, well, that was very interesting. I've learned quite a bit about an area that I've only visited a few times. I do want to go back there now, possibly not at midnight and
No,
the solstices,
nope.
but it is somewhere that I do intend going to have another look. Really good.
Good, good. And we will actually be doing St. Nicholas again, because I haven't done the other part of St. Nicholas, which is another story associated with it. Right, Amy, go for it.
Yeah, really good. Really enjoyed it. Yes, I would go at midnight. Yes, I would stay and sleep there.
And actually, Amy, there is another bit of a story.
Yeah.
Years ago, about, it was 2012. I was just coming out of a really bad relationship with two women.
Yeah.
Don't go there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was involved with one relationship. I met another woman to get over that relationship. And anyway, long story short, it was summer solstice. I thought, right, sod this. I went out and bought a tent, loads of food and stuff, right? And actually camped out on just behind the burial chamber, and it was
Yeah.
fine. The weirdest thing was, then I was joined by a few other people, and it was great because I fed them all and gave them all drink in my tent. It was great. So, but then obviously everything's changed, because I've been doing these walks and so on, and then you start to get connected.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So what we're going to do,
Also, wait.
go for it quickly.
I wanted, because I couldn't speak at the beginning, I wanted to say to Dal, when he had gone for a minute, there were orbs all over his camera.
Oh, scary
Right.
and interesting.
Yeah.
Scary and interesting. So what I'm going to say, this is being recorded, so those that don't want their faces seen, then put off your thingy now, but we're going to put the mics on 3, 2, 1, now. Good. Right, excellent. So here we go, folks. I'm going to put your mics back on. Unmute you all. Right. How did you think about that, Sue and Barbara? I can't bloody hear them. You're muted. Karen, I've unmuted you. All of you.
Right, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You're
Yeah,
witch.
right. Yeah, I can remember visiting Tinkinswood Burial Chamber on a school trip when I'd been about 11 or 12, and I've never been back since, but I will. Once the lockdown is lifted, I will go back and revisit it.
Oh,
That was
brilliant.
very interesting.
Brilliant. What about you, Gillian?
I have been there many years ago, but I was going to ask, have there been any other sightings there that have been recorded?
None at all. However, no, I'm wrong there, because I remember reading a few years ago, there was a guy who was involved. See, it's the same people. There was a guy who was a Wiccan. I'm not a Wiccan, but he went there, and he had this feeling of being pulled and being pushed, and some weird things happening with him, and this was, I think, in the daytime. So yes, I can remember reading that. Yes, this was years ago. I remember reading that, but other than that, nothing. I think the problem was because this site does strange things to me. So I don't usually tell people what religion I am, and none of you probably know. So I don't usually tell people what religion I am. And that night I told people what I did. And when I got back, it was like, and Michelle said, "What the hell do you tell them all that for? They must think you're a right nut job." And I just thought, but the thing is, because I think I opened myself, and I think I think it made me vulnerable. So hence why that happened. Gillian.
Right. The other thing, Carl, is Pentre Meyrick named after that family, Roger Meyrick's family?
To be honest with you, do you know what? I'm going to say yes, because it's quite strange, because he would have passed through there.
Yeah.
Roger, I've come across Roger Meyrick a few times in my travels, but this is the first one that you actually see him actually written down. And do you know what I'm going to do, Gillian? That's going to be your homework for next week.
Mine?
Yeah. we don't actually have homework on the Saturday evening, but we do now.
Oh, thanks a bunch.
Well, actually, do you know what? I'll look that one up. Pentre Meyrick, named after. Right. Okay. So
Spelt
what?
but it might have been spelt differently hundreds of years ago.
Yeah. This is spelled. Now the thing is, the one thing that I realized, this story, right? Roger Meyrick, Meyrick. When you Meyrick, but you're right, it could have been spelled differently, right? But when you go into this story, it says late in the autumn of 1649, which was 5 years later, but the battle was in 1648. So Mary Trevilian's made a mistake there, and I every time I've read this story outright, I always make that mistake of not correcting the date. But if nobody spotted that, it doesn't really matter. But obviously, this is 5 years on. I think the interesting thing about this is that Morgan Button warned that he would see his son again. But Morgan Button is one of those sort of ghostly figures that is actually warning you that your son's going to turn up, but Morgan's actually not there. Well, he is there, but he's not actually still alive. Right, Barbara and Sue.
Well, I'm a very prosaic person, so what I want to know is, do you now take Michelle's advice when she says, don't go there?
I did something really stupid about 2 weeks ago, and I wish I taken her advice. Yeah, she also tells me not to sleep with other women. I take that advice because I know what would happen. But yeah, I need to. Yeah, obviously, yeah. The thing is, it was like there was another walk that she actually physically begged me on the phone, and I actually took her advice, and I actually went back the next day. So I do take notice, but that night I should have, and I didn't. And look what happened. I was in a real mess. In fact, I was in a real mess for a few weeks. And I can remember teaching my classes, and there was just something not quite right about me for all those weeks. So, Gillian, I tell you what, you have the last word.
Me?
Yeah, may as well.
You've never been the same.
I don't think I have. I've never been the same since.
Never been the same, and you never will be.
I never will be. Do you know what? I think it was started addressing women's frocks and all the rest of it, did it?
I think that was the turning point. Yes,
that was the turning point. But mind you, having my acting agent turn around and say we don't have a woman to play this female role, I think that did it.
That's your excuse.
I tell you now, that's real. I was, we have our end of year do. The DJ afterwards, he come up to me and he said, I've always been angry with you. And I said, why? He said, that role that you had on Casualty, I was meant to do that role, right? But I didn't look, I didn't look as much of a woman as you do. And I just thought, right, okay, I think I'll take that as a compliment.
Oh, well, then Terry phoned me today and she was asking me to ask you, she said, have you still got her long red dress? But she does want the pearl earrings back.
The problem is, I loaned that dress to Keith, and yeah. But there is one good thing about those red earrings. She can have them back because they're clip-ons. Amy's been using them, and the next time I see Amy, I'll get them off her. Okay.
Okay, I'll tell Terry.
They suit. And do you know what? Do you know what? I would like to say this is so much more relaxed this evening. And I've got to be honest with you. I don't know if the sound went with the rest. Karen, did the sound break up with you earlier on?
Yeah.
I'm sorry about that. But it was okay, was it?
Yeah, fine. Yeah.
Okay. So what I'm going to say is that obviously. Probably in the next 2 months, we're going to need to have people, if they can invite 1 or 2 of the old class people over to your homes. And somebody's going to have Dennis in their house.
On lockdown.
Oh no, Dennis is lovely. He's really lonely. Apparently, when I shouldn't be telling you this, but I love joking with Dennis. Apparently, the other day when Andrea opened the door, he was still in his underpants.
That could have been a good thing.
Oh yeah, better that he's got them on than not. Yeah.
Good.
He denied they were off, though. That's the thing. And so did Andrea. So I don't know what that says. So if nobody's got any other questions, anyone else? Okay. Next week we will be doing. We'll be doing Aberthor next week. And Aberthor's a strange one. Oh God, the Aberthor walk's got another bloody story associated with it. We've only ever done the walk once, and when we did it, they blocked off the car park, and they put signs up saying walk is cancelled. It was really strange. But that's for next week. So if nobody's got anything else to say, have you all enjoyed this tonight?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'll be speaking to most of you on Monday anyway. And obviously I'll see you. Well, Gillian never answers her phone on a Monday, so don't worry about it.
Oh, I'm busy.
Yeah, I'm busy phoning you guys as well. Yeah, but anyway, so if anyone wants to chat at the end, then they're very welcome. If not, I'm going to say good night to everybody. So good night, Karen, Del, Amy,
Good night,
Barbara,
all.
Sue,
Night,
and Gillian.
everyone. Night.
Night,
Night.
folks. Night. Don't let the bed bugs bite. Gillian, are you still there, Amy? Amy. Right.
Yeah, I'm here. Hi.
How did that go tonight? Was that okay?
That was okay. I'm really sorry about the audio. My phone had an update, and
right.
And it's the tracking update that the government has done. And basically, I can't connect to my internet automatically. And I don't know what's going on with the audio. I'm using my microphone at the minute, but yeah.
Right.
But otherwise, it was really good, really interesting. I enjoyed that.
That story wasn't too long, was it?
Which story?
The Roger Merrick one.
No, I thought it was good.
Good.
And can I a challenge and a request?
Oh God, what's the challenge?
Okay, when we get back, I want to go to the Bristol prison that I sent you in the email.
What is a walk?
No, you spend a night in a cell in the most haunted prison in the UK.
Fuck off.
Oh,
no.
come on.
No.
Oh, come on, please.
Oh God.
We can have a first ever Ghost Experience Cymru excursion to the most haunted place.
Fucking hell. God, do you imagine?
Oh, come on. Look,
you imagine?
here's my gauntlet, invisible gauntlet, and throwing it down here.
I will think about it.
And a request. On my birthday, which is Saturday, 18th of July, please can we cover Highgate Cemetery?
What, as a lecture?
A ghost evening.
Highgate Cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
What's the date of that?
Saturday, 18th of July.
All right then. We'll do it for you.
Yay! Thank you.
We'll do it for you. We do requests. Yeah. Okay. Then that's fine.
Okay. But yeah, please think about it because I really, really want to go. What's his name went? Josh and Becca went.
Oh, Highgate Cemetery.
No, Highgate. The prison in Bristol.
Oh God, when did they go there?
I think it was a few weeks after we had that weird night up in the priory.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah.
Yeah. The walk that should never ever taken place. Yeah, fair enough. Okay then, Amy. Okay then. Well, I'll see you next week then. Oh, and by the way, we did send you a link to take part on Wednesday evening, but you didn't turn up. The Welsh archaeology and history. Hello. Hello. Are you there? Hello. Amy, you've gone. Amy, you've gone. Are you there? Hello? Hello? What's happened to that? Right. Amy, if there's anything else, email it to me. I can't hear you now. Oh, do you want to chat? No? On there? Look, anyway, I'm going to end the recording. So I'll speak to you soon.